Hello everybody, this is Post-Production Pi with srlounge.com and welcome to another Lightroom 4 preset system mixology tutorial. I've recorded that little intro about 10 times because that is a tongue twister. Now recently we've gotten quite a few requests to create a mixology preset specifically designed for babies and infant photography. So we're going to do that in this tutorial. Now of course with all of our preset system tutorials we're going to go over how to create the mixology with our preset system and then what the actual settings are so those that don't have the preset system can kind of understand what we're doing. So let's get started. Now we don't focus on shooting babies and infants. We are a wedding and portrait photography studio, but I have done my fair share, and there's two very noticeable things that I always kind of see with infants. Number one is that their skin tones are often a little bit more on the pink side. And number two is that because their skin hasn't quite fully developed, it's rather thin and you can see quite a bit of the veins underneath the skin. So we need to make sure that we address these two things when we create our preset. Now as always, when you're creating a new preset, we always recommend that you use an image that's properly exposed. That way the exposure adjustments are based on a proper exposure and not because the image is too dark or too bright. Now let's get started, guys. We are using Lightroom 4 preset system version 1.2. If you guys haven't updated yet, be sure to update before starting this video. So what we're going to do first is select our standard import preset as always, and then we're going to go down to our base adjustments and dial in our settings. We don't need to do anything with exposure because we're going to keep it where it's at. What I want to do first is go down to base tones. We're going to do a portrait flatten. This is going to flatten out some of the highlight tones in the skin. We're going to then go to 22 heavy softened skin. This is new in the 1.2 update, and this is specifically designed for those close-up portraits and for babies when you need some extra skin softening. We're going to go down, we're going to skip over contrast, we're going to go to saturation, and we're going to go to neutral zeroed out. And this is going to prevent basically any kind of funky skin tones from appearing within shadows and stuff like that. If we have vibrance boosted or saturation boosted, we might get that kind of crazy skin tones. Alright, now from here we just need to select out the correct curve. And if you guys remember, because the skin tones are a little bit more on the pink side, I want my curve to also add a little bit of warming to it. So we're going to select a warm curve. I'm going to go down to the neutral punches because I do want to punch up the overall contrast, and we're going to select the amber neutral punch. And we're done, guys. This is it. We've created our preset. It's just a few clicks away, and now we're going to save this out. To do so, simply go up and hit plus. We're going to put this into the My Mixology folder. It's going to be saved. Actually, let's hit cancel just so we can see the previous names and so we can get a good name for it. We're going to go to My Mixology folder. We're going to hit 14 or type in 14, and we're going to call this extra soft. We'll call this warm extra soft. And we'll put in behind it in parentheses, we'll say infants because that's what it's designed for. Now we're going to select check all. We're going to unselect white balance, unselect lens profile corrections, transform, and chromatic aberration. These three things are built into the standard import preset, and with white balance we want to dial that in on each image itself. With exposure, you can choose whether or not you want to include that. If you do include it, it's going to zero out the exposure with every image that you select. If you don't select it, it won't adjust the exposure. It'll just apply the overall effect. I'm going to keep it on there because I like to keep exposure because it tells me where the image exposure should be. For this image, it's telling me that basically the image exposure should be set to correct exposure. Alright, so we're going to hit create at this point. It should pop in right there. And I actually added a dash and we didn't need to add a dash. Let's remove that dash so it's consistent with the other ones. And there we go. I just right clicked and hit rename in case you guys missed that. Alright, so we're done with our preset. Let's check out the before and the after. Here's the before and here is the after. We still have, babies oftentimes they'll be a little more pink in certain areas, and so if we wanted to correct this we would need to actually brush in a little bit more warming kind of tones into that area. But it's kind of beyond this tutorial, so we'll skip that for now. Let's go over the actual settings so you guys kind of know what was done. Now over on the basic adjustments here on the tones, we basically pull down the highlights and the whites. We've brought up the shadows and the blacks a little bit, and this kind of pulls all the tones in and reduces the shadows and the highlights over skin tones. We have then reduced clarity to -25, and we brought vibrance and everything back down to 0. Going on to our tone curve, we've basically added a contrast adding S curve, and we've added a little bit of reds and a little bit of greens to this curve while pulling down just a little bit of the blues, and this gives it that overall warming tone. Now Moving down from there, we have our detail. With our extra softening, what has happened basically is it's done a little bit of detail adjustments here. We have the same standard sharpening setting as in our standard import preset, but with our noise reduction, it's been boosted just a tiny bit more. Now at 30, with these close-up portraits, you're not going to notice any loss in detail, but you will notice the skin and the pores will be quite a bit softer. So it's a great overall look there. With lens vignetting, we have the standard amount of 30 with the midpoint of 30, and that creates our standard kind of uniform edge-to-edge brightness that we have in the standard import preset. All right, guys, so we're done here. Let's go to another image and let's check it out. So here's another baby portrait, and let's apply this. From here on out, basically all you should be adjusting is really just the temperature and the exposure. So we're going to select that. And I actually really like the warmth on this image. It's a little bit on the warm side, but I kind of dig that look anyway. I'm going to bring the exposure down just one little click, just to pull it back a little bit. I kind of like it a little bit more on the bright side too, because it's very flattering for skin. But I love the way it looks just right there. We don't really need to do anything else with this portrait. So here's the before, and here is the after. You can see how it does a really nice job, especially in these shadow areas, of pulling out basically the shadows and the highlights. It does a great job of smoothing out the skin. It does exactly what we need it to do. Alright guys, so hopefully you all enjoyed this tutorial, and we'll see you guys in the next video.